He brought his mistress to a luxury gala to humiliate his quiet wife. Big mistake, because the woman he thought was home crying had already divorced him in secret. And when she walked into that ballroom in platinum silk, on the arm of a man nobody dared look at twice, the entire room froze. What happened next didn't just destroy his marriage. It destroyed his name, his company, and everything he thought he controlled.
Heels. Ryan Caldwell had spent most of his adult life confusing attention with admiration, and because the world had rewarded that confusion for so long, he had come to believe it was intelligence. At 41, Heels, he was the polished face of Caldwell Holdings, a public company valued high enough that financial news anchors said his name with a certain bright confidence, as if saying it too softly might lower the stock price. He had a good jaw, Heels, a practiced half-smile, and the kind of money that made people forgive him before they had fully understood what he had done. On the third Saturday of January, Heels, he stood in Suite 1802 of the Monteverde Hotel, knotting a black tie in front of a mirror taller than most apartment doors, while behind him Vanessa Cole stepped out of the bathroom in a red gown and watched his reflection instead of his face. Heels. That detail mattered. Most people who wanted something from Ryan learned fast that his reflection was the safer place to look. Heels. It gave you the polished version, the version that had been edited, lit, and sold. Vanessa was 26, from Ohio, Heels, with careful posture and expensive hair, and the new kind of beauty that had not yet learned how cruel rich men could be when the room changed temperature. She had moved to Manhattan with ambition, not malice. There was a difference, Heels. Ryan had never cared about the difference. To him, women arrived in categories: useful, decorative, temporary, dangerous. Wives were meant to steady the image. Mistresses were meant to sharpen it. He fastened his cufflinks, turned, Heels, and dragged his eyes down the line of Vanessa's dress as if he were approving a purchase. "Tonight," she said softly, "are you really going to do this?" He knew what she meant. She meant the gala, the Hartwell Foundation event. 400 people, Heels, investors, board-adjacent donors, political aides, hedge fund people, old money wives who smiled with their mouths closed and remembered everything. Heels. Ryan smiled at her in the mirror.
"That's the whole point,"
he said. "She won't be there." He did not say Isabella's name. He rarely used it anymore. Not because the name hurt, because naming a person made them real again. Vanessa walked toward him, Heels, one hand sliding up his lapel. "And after tonight?" she asked. "After Q1, he said. I file, we clean it up. By summer, everything looks different." The promise was smooth because it was old. He had used versions of it before, Heels. Not always with the same wording. Always with the same intention. Delay, control, keep one woman hopeful and another uncertain. He had been doing that for years and had gotten very good at mistaking manipulation for management. 43 blocks north, Heels. Isabella Varley sat at a vanity table in a suite at the Arlen Hotel and pinned a diamond earring into place with fingers that looked steady, unless you knew her well enough to notice the slight pause before each movement. She was 33, slim, Heels, dark-haired, Heels, elegant in a way money could never fully buy because it came from restraint, not display. Her makeup artist, Juliana, had worked with her for more than a decade and knew better than to ask the obvious questions. "Are you sure? Are you ready?" Heels. "Do you want me to stay after?" Those were questions for women who still had options left to debate. Isabella had made her choices months ago. What remained tonight was execution. The dress laid across the bed was pale platinum silk, Heels, narrow through the waist, one shoulder bare, no glitter, no desperate effort to outshine anybody. It was the opposite of Vanessa's red. Red asked to be noticed. Platinum assumed the room would notice on its own, Heels. On the dresser sat a cream leather folder holding copies of a divorce decree Ryan had never opened, correspondence from attorneys, property documents, Heels, and one handwritten note she had left unfinished because she didn't yet know whether she needed the last line to be kind or final, Heels. Her father had told her a long time ago that in important matters kindness and clarity could look similar from far away, but up close they were rarely the same thing. On the armchair near the window waited Mateo, 60 if you had to guess, Heels, broad in the shoulders, quiet in the way of men who had long ago stopped wasting motion. He had worked for her father first, then for her, Heels. He had seen Isabella as a child carrying too many books through rooms full of men pretending not to notice that the boss's daughter listened harder than his sons did. He had seen her at 19, learning how to hold her face still in tense rooms, feels. He had seen her at 26 in white at her wedding, looking at Ryan like he had been sent to her by a kinder god than the one her family usually dealt with. And he had seen her 2 months ago, sitting on a chair by the window of her suite, feels, holding a cup of tea gone cold while private photographs of her husband's affairs sat in neat stacks on the table beside her, feels. He's downstairs, Matteo said. Isabella met his eyes in the mirror. She knew who he meant. Luca DeSantis. How does he look? She asked. Matteo's expression barely moved, like a man who already decided what matters tonight, feels. That was as close to tenderness as Matteo usually got. Down below, in a long black car with dark glass and quiet leather, Luca read a message on his phone and locked it again without replying. He was 39, Italian by birth, feels. Wealthy in the discreet way that never appeared on magazine covers, and calm with the kind of discipline that made other men look noisy. If Ryan Caldwell's power came from being seen, Luca's came from the opposite, feels. From who lowered their voice when he entered, from which conversation stopped before he had asked them to. He had spent years in finance, logistics, hospitality, feels, and several other industries people wrote about one way in newspapers and understood another way in private. His family name opened some doors and shut others, feels. He knew what rumors existed. He never corrected the useful ones. He wore a black tuxedo without a tie because he disliked costumes even when the event required them, and a small silver rope knot pin at the lapel, feels. To most of the room tonight it would mean nothing. To the few who knew old Sicilian families and newer European money, it would say enough. Matteo slipped into the seat opposite him. She says 10 minutes, feels. Luca checked his watch and exhaled through his nose. She has been saying 10 minutes for an hour. Matteo almost smiled. She is a woman about to end one life and begin another. Time is allowed to behave strangely, feels. Luca looked out at the snow collecting along Park Avenue. He had been in New York since September because Don Marco Varley had called him into a private dining room in Westchester and asked, in a tone that was not a request, feels, whether he would consider helping his daughter untangle a husband who had mistaken gentleness for helplessness, feels. That conversation had changed more than one life. But Luca did not think in sentimental terms. He thought in sequences. First secure the legal exit, then control the property, then isolate the man from his usual channels of damage, feels. Then give the woman who had been humiliated a chance to decide whether she wanted revenge, silence, distance, or a lesson. Isabella had chosen a lesson, public enough to matter, controlled enough to remain dignified, real enough to live with afterward, feels. That was what he respected about her. She did not want to destroy Ryan because destruction was dramatic. She wanted him to feel for one measurable night the weight of consequences, not bullets, not scandal manufactured from lies, consequences, feels. There was something almost old-fashioned in that. If anything goes wrong, Luca said without looking up, service exit, straight to the bridge. Matteo nodded once. Nothing will go wrong. If it does. If it does, Matteo repeated. Feels. Ryan and Vanessa arrived at 9:42. The Monteverde's white canopy threw clean light over the falling snow. Photographers shouted his name before the car door had opened all the way. He enjoyed that, more than he should have. He stepped out, feels, adjusted his jacket, then offered his hand to Vanessa with the faint flourish of a man who believed the world was a stage, and women were proof he deserved the center of it. She emerged slowly, one red heel, then the slit of the gown, feels, then a smile she had practiced in mirrors and on Instagram Live and in the reflected black windows of expensive restaurants. Flashes hit. Ryan placed one hand at her lower back. They moved toward the entrance. Ryan, over here? Ryan, who's the lady? Feels. Ryan, any comment on the separation rumors? He laughed it off. The reporters laughed with him. That was how cities worked. Nobody wanted to be the first person to make a rich man feel embarrassed unless the market had already turned. Feels. Inside, the lobby smelled like lilies and polished stone. Men in dinner jackets drifted through the room, speaking in low voices about funds and acquisitions and schools their children would never have to worry about getting into. Feels. Women in navy dresses took coats without looking surprised by anything. Ryan was greeted every 12 feet. Greg Moulton from Lansing Fox, a real estate developer named Edmund Hose, a donor with a vineyard in Napa and 3 divorces. Feels. A senator's aide who was too young for the haircut he had chosen. Everyone noticed Vanessa. Nobody said the word wife. Ryan liked that too. It felt like power. He didn't understand it was actually cowardice. In rooms like this, feels, silence often wore the same suit as approval. By 10:15 they were seated at table 3, close enough to the stage to feel chosen. Ryan had paid enough to be there. Vanessa lifted her champagne flute before he told her to pace herself. Eels. She laughed and said she never drank slow. Eels. He was about to reply, something condescending and playful, when the sound in the ballroom shifted. Not silence. Silence is too dramatic a word. Wealthy rooms do not fall silent all at once. They tighten. The register changes. Voices lower by instinct. Eels. Not command. Heads turn because other heads have turned. A waiter stops mid-step and corrects his path. Laughter thins out. Ryan looked up because everyone else had. At the double doors beneath the north balcony stood a woman in platinum silk, heels, one hand at her side, shoulders back, eyes moving across the room with neither hesitation nor apology. Heels. Behind and slightly to her left stood a man in black whose stillness made people with guilty consciences want to check whether they had locked their phones. Ryan's fingertips tightened around the stem of his glass. Vanessa whispered, "Who is that?" Heels. He did not answer, not because he didn't know, because for a second his brain rejected the evidence of his own sight. Heels. Isabella had been gone 61 days. The last time he had seen her, she'd been in the penthouse kitchen wearing one of his old college t-shirts, holding coffee with both hands, saying she thought they needed to talk. He had told her not now. Heels. He had Singapore at 9. He had not come home that night. The next evening she had been gone, leaving a note that said she was staying at the Arlen for a few days and needed space. Heels. He had folded the note and dropped it in the trash like it was an inconvenience, not a boundary. He had not called. She had not called. He had told his assistant, his mother, and his attorney the same thing. Temporary. Emotional. She'll settle down. Heels. Men like Ryan never believed a woman's absence was an action. They mistook it for waiting. Now she crossed the room toward him, and for the first time in years, Ryan felt something colder than embarrassment. He felt uncertainty. Heels. The room knew her in ways he had never bothered to understand. Heels. Certain men straightened in their chairs. Certain women stopped pretending to chat. Edmund Hose, who had met Isabella twice and once complimented her understanding of municipal bonds with visible surprise, went still as carved stone. Heels. Isabella reached table 3 and stopped. She did not sit. "Ryan," she said, and the calm in her voice did more damage than fury would have. He stood too fast, knocking his napkin to the floor. "Izzy, No," she said softly. "Not that tonight." Heels. Vanessa rose too, instinctively clutching Ryan's sleeve. Isabella's gaze dropped to the hand pause, then returned to Ryan's face. "Introduce me," she said. He swallowed. "We can talk somewhere private. We are talking now." Her tone did not sharpen. Heels. "It didn't need to. Introduce me." The people at the neighboring tables had stopped eating. The dance floor beyond them glowed empty and polished under chandeliers the size of small cars. Heels. Ryan's face held that corporate smile men wear when they are trying to buy time with their teeth. "This is Vanessa," he said at last. "Vanessa Cole." "Your girlfriend," Isabella said. He did not answer fast enough. She turned her head toward Vanessa. Heels. "How long?" Vanessa's confidence cracked so quickly it was almost audible. "I'm sorry? How long have you been with my husband?" Vanessa looked at Ryan. Ryan, who had told her his wife was practically gone, emotionally unstable, out of the picture. Heels. Ryan stared at Isabella's earrings like he had never seen them before. "A year," Vanessa said weakly. "A little over." Isabella nodded once. "That's consistent." Ryan found his voice. "Consistent with what?" "With the others." The words were light. Heels. The effect was not. Vanessa blinked. Isabella looked back at Ryan. Heels. "Would you like me to list them alphabetically or by year?" A few people nearby lowered their eyes. Not out of shame, but because rich people know when they are in the presence of a turning point. Heels. And some of them prefer to consume it through peripheral vision. Ryan's ears had gone red. He looked over Isabella's shoulder at the man in black. "Who is that?" The man did not move. Isabella answered for him. "My husband." Heels. For one strange beat, Ryan thought he had misheard. Not because the word was unclear, because his mind did not permit a reality in which someone else had moved on before he had finished controlling the previous version. "What?" "My husband." Heels. Isabella repeated. She turned just enough. "Luca." "This is Ryan Caldwell. Ryan, this is Luca DeSantis." Luca inclined his head perhaps half an inch. He did not extend a hand. "Mr. Caldwell," he said quietly. Ryan stared from one to the other. Heels. "We're married," he said to Isabella, and the desperation in his voice startled even him. Heels. "You and I are married." "No," she said, "we are not. We have not been married since November 14th. He laughed once. "A terrible sound. That's impossible." It is documented, feels. She spoke the next words with the precise control of someone who had repeated them in her head enough times to remove every emotional splinter. Feels. You were served in your office on August 22nd at 2:40 in the afternoon by a process server named Rosa Delgado. You signed for the envelope. You put it in the bottom drawer of your desk. You never opened it. You did not respond. Feels. After the statutory period elapsed, the court proceeded. The decree was entered in November. A copy was delivered to your office today. Unopened, I assume. Ryan went pale. Vanessa stepped back from him without meaning to. Feels. In that single unconscious movement, some hidden truth entered her body. Not the legal one, the human one. Feels. The realization that her entire life for the past year had been built on a man's selective omissions. You said, she whispered to Ryan, you said the divorce hadn't even started. Vanessa, not now. No, actually, Isabella said. Feels. Turning to her with a calm that made Vanessa more frightened than anger would have. Now is the perfect time. Has he bought you an apartment yet? What? The one before you got a loft in Chelsea. The one before that, Tribeca. Feels. I'm curious, inflation has improved the quality of his apologies. The color drained from Vanessa's face in stages. First shock, then humiliation, then the dawning horror of being grouped. Isabella's gaze held no cruelty, Feels, which made the moment even harsher. It is not entirely your fault, she said. Men like him are persuasive when they need a witness to their own lies. There it was. The first thread of the new value Isabella had chosen for this night. Feels, not revenge for spectacle. Feels. A lesson delivered in public about how easily people become instruments when another person stops seeing them as human beings. Ryan felt the room tilt away from him. He tried to grasp the only thing still available. Force. Volume. This is a spectacle, Feels. He snapped. You're making a spectacle of yourself in front of people who matter. Isabella's expression did not change. I chose this room because these are the people who matter to you, she said. You made a spectacle months ago. Feels. I simply turned the lights on. Feels. She had imagined this moment so many times in the privacy of her suite that when it finally arrived, what surprised Isabella was not the sharpness of her own control but the exhaustion underneath it. Rage would have been easier. Feels. Rage burns hot and fast. It gives the body clear instructions. Raise the voice, accuse, break something. But the truth was more complicated. Ryan had not shattered her life in one theatrical act. He had thinned it out over years. Delayed calls, Feels. Half listening at dinner. Affairs disguised as travel. The subtle erosion of being treated as background in her own marriage. People who had never lived inside that kind of betrayal often imagined a wife left because of one woman, one text, Feels, one hotel receipt. They did not understand the quieter damage, the way disrespect accumulates, the way a person begins to disappear from herself because another person keeps behaving as if her feelings are optional, Feels. That was the part Isabella wanted the room to feel, even if none of them would ever say it out loud. She looked at Ryan and for a split second saw the man she had married at 26. Not clearly, just a flicker, Feels. St. Jean-Baptiste on the Upper East Side, winter light through stained glass, his hand warm at her waist, her own face aching from how hard she had tried not to cry. She had met him at a Christmas fundraiser years earlier, Feels, back when he was rising but not yet untouchable, and she had been drawn to his velocity, to the confidence, to the sense that life around him might move at a speed different from the one imposed by her family's quiet empire, Feels. Isabella had grown up in a house where money was abundant, but emotion was managed with ceremony. Don Marco Varley believed in loyalty, discipline, and generosity to those who depended on him. He also believed secrets had structure, Feels. His daughter learned early that kindness could coexist with power, but only if you were very deliberate about where you placed your trust. Ryan had felt like an escape route from all that heaviness. American, clean-handed as far as she knew, Feels. Ambitious in a visible, respectable way. A man who built companies instead of kingdoms. He told good stories. He made her laugh. More importantly, in the beginning, he noticed things that had mattered to her more than she admitted, Feels. The first winter they dated, he had asked why she always turned the stems of wine glasses clockwise when she was thinking. No man had ever asked her anything that specific. She had thought it meant he saw her. Looking back now, Feels, she understood that charming men are often very observant at first, because observation is how they learn where to place the hook. Still, she had loved him, not recklessly, honestly. That honesty was what made the rest of this night necessary, Feels. Because if she could be fooled, then so could other women. Because if a man could build status by reducing everyone around him to functions, then at least once, in one ballroom, someone ought to say it plainly. Heels. The room around them seemed to lean inward without moving. People love humiliation when it happens at a safe distance. Yet beneath the appetite there was also fear. Not fear of Isabella. Fear of recognition. Heels. Several men in that ballroom had wives at home who knew less than they should. Several women at those tables had swallowed more disrespect than their husbands suspected. Heels. Public disgrace is interesting, partly because it hints that private accounts can come due. Ryan tried to regain footing. Whatever lawyer you found, he said, whatever little setup this is. Pritchard Hayes, Isabella said. Heels. They were your divorce firm the second time. They represented me beautifully. His face twitched. She let that land, then continued. Heels. The apartment on Central Park West was never yours. It was held in trust in my name as a wedding gift from my father. You were not a beneficiary. You have until the end of February to remove your belongings. Someone at table 5 dropped a fork. Heels. Ryan stared at her like language itself had betrayed him. Your father, he said slowly, because some instinct in him had finally started pulling at the right thread. Your father is not some accountant in White Plains. For the first time that evening, Heels. A shift moved across Isabella's face. Not pleasure. Something colder, release perhaps. The end of hiding. No, she said. My father's name is Marco Varley. Heels. There are moments when a room full of powerful people manages a collective silence so complete it becomes almost physical. This was one. On the periphery, Isabella saw 3 separate men stop pretending not to listen. Heels. Edmund Hose rose from his chair, old enough to remember when certain Italian surnames controlled shipping, waste, unions, and favors from the shoreline to the suburbs. I want it on record, he said to Isabella, voice tight, that I was not aware. Heels. I know, she replied. Sit down, Edmund. He did. His wife reached for her wine. Ryan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The blankness on his face was not disbelief now. It was computation collapsing under missing data. 7 years. Heels. 7 years married to a woman he had reduced to tasteful domesticity, and he had never once asked why certain old men at holiday benefits shook her hand with both of theirs. Heels. Never wondered how a shy woman in modest cashmere could move through luxury hotels as if she owned the walls. Never asked who paid the trust managers, or why the penthouse deed had arrived through attorneys he barely read. Heels. He had mistaken her refusal to parade power for lack of power. Heels. That mistake said more about him than it ever could about her. You lied to me, he said, and it was the wrong sentence, but men like Ryan always choose the wrong wound first. Isabella almost laughed. No, Heels. I withheld information from a man who measured everything. There is a difference. I wanted to know if you would choose me without my family in the room. You did not. The sentence hit harder than any accusation, because it named the simplest failure. Heels. Not that he had cheated, not that he had been careless, that he had never been curious enough about the woman he married to ask who she really was. That was the educational lesson threaded through all of it. Heels. The one Isabella hoped even the cruelest people in the room might carry home, if only because it would be useful later. Respect is attention. Respect is not grand declarations. It is interest. Listening. Heels. The refusal to turn a person into furniture while still expecting them to hold up your house. Ryan had no language for that. Heels. He only understood leverage, so he turned toward Luca. And you, he said, voice uneven now, what are you doing here? You think walking into my event on her arm means you get to? Luca lifted his chin slightly. I am not here to do anything to you. Heels, he said. Tonight is hers. That line moved through the nearest tables like a current, because everybody understood what it implied. Restraint, structure. The existence of larger consequences postponed, not erased. Ryan heard it too. Heels. For the first time that night, he looked genuinely frightened. Not of violence exactly, of irrelevance. Of discovering that decisions about his life were now being made in rooms where his opinions no longer ranked first. Heels. Vanessa spoke before she knew she was going to. Did you know? She asked Ryan, voice small and shredded. Did you know who she was? He did not answer. Did you ever know anything about your own wife? That question, from all people, Heels, landed where Isabella had not expected. Heels. She turned and looked at Vanessa properly. The girl's lipstick had begun to dry at the edges. Her composure was gone. Under the glamour was someone very young, very embarrassed, and very suddenly aware that she had mistaken proximity to power for safety. Heels. Isabella felt a flash of pity. Real pity. Not softness, not solidarity, just recognition. Another human being standing inside a lie big enough to rearrange her self-respect. Miss Cole, Isabella said more gently, leave with your own dignity intact. Eels. Do not stay beside a man who can only speak to women when he thinks they improve the room. Vanessa stared at her. It was perhaps the only truly kind thing anyone had said to her that whole evening. Ryan hissed. Enough. Isabella turned back to him. Eels. No, she said. Not enough. You spent years assuming there would never be a cost because I was quiet. You confused quiet with weak. You confused patience with permission. Tonight you get the bill. Eels. Then, because she had promised herself she would not leave without saying the one truth that had taken the longest to sharpen, she lowered her voice and spoke only to him, though the tables closest still heard every word. I loved you, she said. Eels. That was real. I hid who I was because I wanted the part of me that cooked for you, listened to you, waited for you, believed you, to be enough. You did not choose that woman. You barely saw her. So I am taking her back. Eels. She had rehearsed variants of that speech in the mirror and in the dark, and while half asleep. Yet saying it now felt nothing like rehearsal. It felt like setting down a weight she had carried so long she had begun to think it was bone. Ryan looked at her, Eels, and for a brief second his expression lost all the curated layers. Beneath the pride, the annoyance, the entitlement, there was something childishly stunned. Not remorse, not yet. Eels. The incomprehension of a man who had never imagined that a person he neglected might still possess a full internal world. Isabella did not wait for him to answer. This was not an argument. It was a conclusion. She turned. Luca offered his arm. Eels. She took it the way a woman takes shelter she has chosen, not a rescue she has begged for. Together they crossed the ballroom in 22 measured seconds while 400 people pretended not to watch and failed. At the doors she paused once, Eels. Not to gloat, not to smile, but simply to look back at Ryan as if taking inventory on an old apartment she no longer intended to keep. Then she left. The room did not explode. Rooms like that rarely do, they murmur, Eels. Phones appeared under tables and behind napkins. Whispers traveled faster than applause. By midnight, the story would be in private group chats. By morning in the business press, Eels. But in the long white corridor outside the ballroom, where the noise softened into hotel hush, Isabella's hand on Luca's sleeve trembled so slightly she almost missed it. Matteo already held the elevator. They stepped inside. The doors slid shut. Eels. Only then did Luca cover her hand with his own. You're shaking, he said. She looked down, almost surprised. It can shake, he added. It is allowed. The words were so simple that they undid something in her chest. Eels. For months she had held herself together through legal consultations, property transfers, surveillance reports, discussions with her father, and the strange practicalities of ending a marriage in which grief and administration marched side by side. Eels. Everyone had admired her control. Few had acknowledged the cost of maintaining it. Thank you for coming, she whispered. Luca looked at her. I would have come whether you asked me or not. Downstairs, the snow had thickened. Eels, whitening the curb and dulling the city's edges. Eels. In the ballroom above, Ryan Caldwell stood by table 3, as if the floor had failed to update around him. Vanessa was no longer touching him. Edmund Hose would not meet his eyes. Greg Moulton had quietly moved toward another table. No one announced the change, but Ryan could feel it with the accuracy of a man whose life depended on social temperature. He was no longer the center. He was the story. And for a public man, that is one of the cruelest transitions there is. Eels. The apartment on East 63rd did not look like what people imagine when they hear the words Mafia Kingpin. There was no vulgarity, no gold lion statues, no guards standing in plain sight with earpieces and blank faces. The building was narrow, old, Eels, impeccably restored, and discreet enough that a person could pass it 100 times without wondering what kind of money sat behind the brick. That was one of the differences between inherited old systems and flashy new wealth, Eels. New wealth announces itself to be believed. Old systems stay quiet because being underestimated is profitable. Isabella had only been there twice before. The first time she noticed the books. The second, Eels, the way the fire was always prepared before anyone entered the room. Tonight she noticed neither right away. She noticed only the sudden absence of performance. No ballroom, no eyes, no need to keep the face arranged. Eels. She slipped off her shoes by the long sofa and curled one foot under herself, holding a glass of whiskey Luca poured without needing instructions beyond neat. The first swallow burned pleasantly. She had been living on tea, sparkling water, Eels, and adrenaline for 6 weeks. Across from her, Luca sat in a dark chair with his own drink untouched. He had a habit of waiting before he spoke, and at first it had unnerved her. Ryan filled silence with charm, excuses, plans, and jokes. Feels. Luca let silence do its work. It turned out she trusted that more. Well, she said, after a long minute, staring into the fire. That is done. That part is done, he said. There are other parts. She gave a short laugh. There are always other parts. Feels. There were. There would be the board, the press. Her mother's concern disguised as soup. Her father's satisfaction disguised as caution. Vanessa's choices. Attorneys. Storage movers. Feels. Messages Ryan was forbidden to send but would likely compose in his head anyway. Feels. The strange bureaucratic afterlife of intimate betrayal. But none of those sat on her chest just then. What sat there was a smaller, sharper thing. He did not recognize me, she said. Luca tilted his head. When I walked in, for 3 seconds maybe, Feels. He looked at me the way he would look at any woman in a room. He did not know my face. Luca did not rush to contradict her. That, too, was part of why she trusted him. He did not cover paint with slogans. After a while, he said he recognized the outcome. Feels. Not the person. She looked up at him and smiled without humor. That is somehow worse. Yes, the honesty of it steadied her. For the first time in years, someone was not trying to manage her feelings on her behalf. Feels. Not telling her Ryan had loved her in his way. Not asking whether she wanted to work through it. Not suggesting forgiveness as a shortcut to comfort. There was healing in that, not in hardness, in accuracy. Her father, for all his discipline, Feels, had taught her that too. Feels. A wound cannot be cleaned if everyone keeps insisting it is only a scratch. Months earlier, when she first began to see the full shape of Ryan's betrayals, she had not gone immediately to her family. That surprised them. It even surprised her. Feels. Part pride, part denial, part a stubborn adolescent part of her still trying to prove that the life she built with Ryan stood separate from the Varley machinery. She hired a private investigator herself first, then a second, Feels, because the first set of photographs felt unreal. Hotel lobbies, sidewalk kisses, hands at backs, Vanessa in March, another woman in May, another in August. The first time she laid the photographs out on the kitchen island, she was not dramatic. Feels. She did not throw them. She put on water for tea, sat down, looked at them until the water whistled itself dry. Only later, when the quiet grew too large, did she drive north to Westchester. Don Marco almost never summoned her directly. Feels. When he did, his tone left no room for creative interpretation. She found him at the head of the dining table with her mother at his right and an unfamiliar man at his left. Luca stood when she entered. Not performative. Reflexive. Bella, Feels. Her father had said, in the warm but guarded Italian he reserved for family matters, "This is Luca." They ate first. Her father believed conversation was cleaner when people had food in them. Feels. During the second course, Luca asked Isabella about a Chelsea gallery she quietly backed. Not to impress her. He actually knew the artist roster. By dessert, Feels. She understood he had already been briefed about Ryan and was careful not to force the knowledge into the room. At the door later, Don Marco took both her hands and told her the truth in a voice so low she felt it more than heard it. Feels. He knows about your husband. He came to me. He asked permission to help you. She had stared at her father, angry at once. I do not need a man chosen for me. Feels. I did not choose him for you, Don Marco said. I gave you an option not to suffer alone. That sentence stayed with her. Not to suffer alone. It sounded simple. It was not how her family usually spoke. Yet age had softened certain corners in her father. Feels. Not publicly, never in business, but with his daughter, yes. He had seen what Ryan's kind of cruelty did, not bruises, worse sometimes, the slow training of a woman to explain away her own neglect. He is not soft, Marco had said of Luca. Good, but not soft. Feels. There is a difference. The next morning at 4 a.m., still awake, Isabella texted the number on Luca's card. What do you want from me, Mr. DeSantis? His reply came within 2 minutes. Nothing you do not want to give. I would like to help you finish this. Feels. If the answer is no, you will not hear from me again. They met for coffee in a place on Lexington with bad espresso and generous windows. He told her plainly what he could do. Introduce the best family law team in the city. Feels. Quietly monitor financial exposure. Help secure the apartment and other assets. Build distance. Structure and strength. The last one she asked, only because if she did not ask it, then she never would. Have you ever killed anyone? Feels. He met her eyes. Yes, 2 years ago. Both men were trying to kill someone else. I will answer more if you need me to. Not today if you don't. She had sat with that. She did not ask more. Strange as it sounds, Feels. The honesty comforted her more than a cleaner lie would have. Ryan lied to preserve image. Luca told uncomfortable truths because he had no interest in being loved for a version of himself that didn't exist. There was dignity in that. Feels. In the months that followed, their relationship formed not out of melodrama, but out of logistics, late-night calls, a few dinners where she actually tasted food, and one afternoon when he found her staring at the divorce petition too long and said, "Feels. You do not have to become cruel to leave a cruel situation." That line mattered. Because part of Isabella feared the only way out was to become some colder, sharper version of herself that would never quite fit again. Luca never asked that of her. Feels. He made room. That was the word she kept returning to. He made room. For anger, for indecision, for silence, for the possibility that she might still love Ryan while also knowing she had to leave him. The legal marriage to Luca came later. Feels. Surprisingly practical in its timing. Her attorneys recommended it after certain asset protections and international complications surfaced. Her father proposed a small ceremony in Calabria where privacy could be guaranteed. Feels. Isabella said yes for reasons she could explain in legal language and not yet fully in emotional ones. 4 witnesses. A cathedral in a town too small to care about gossip from Manhattan. Papers signed. Rings exchanged. No promises beyond the lawful ones. Feels. Yet even then there had been something in the way Luca looked at her when the priest asked whether she entered freely. Not romance, exactly. Recognition. As if he knew that freedom, for a woman leaving humiliation, was not an abstract virtue. Feels. It was a physical state, shoulders lowering, breathing changing, eating without a knot in the throat, sleeping more than 3 hours. Now, in the apartment after the gala, warmed by whiskey and fatigue and the fire's low hum, Feels. Isabella looked at him and asked the question that had been sitting under her tongue since Italy. "Are we really married, Luca?" He raised one eyebrow. "Legally?" "You know what I mean." He turned the glass in his hand once. "Yes." Feels. "Then answer that." Feels. He considered her for a while, not to avoid the question, but to respect it. "The papers are real," he said. "The church was real. The witnesses were real. Whether it is real in the other way, the way you are asking, that depends on what you mean by real." Feels. She huffed a tired laugh. "That sounds like a politician." "No, politicians make ambiguity sound comforting. I am telling you I do not know yet in the exact language I have." She studied him. "Do you love me?" Feels. It slipped out before she could decide whether it was wise. As soon as it was in the room, she felt exposed down to the bone. He did not rescue her from that feeling by answering too fast. Again, she appreciated him for it. "I do not know yet." Feels. He said at last. "I know that I came to this country for you without needing to be asked twice. I know that I have not thought clearly about another woman since September." Feels. "I know that when you walked into that ballroom tonight, I had to remind myself to breathe normally." Feels. "I know that I am not going anywhere while you decide what the word should mean again. That is what I know." The ant did not flatter. It steadied. After Ryan's endless manipulations, steadiness felt more intimate than poetry. Feels. Isabella finished her whiskey, stood, crossed the small distance between them, and sat on the arm of his chair. She placed a hand at the back of his neck and rested her forehead against his temple. She did not kiss him, not yet. Feels. But she let herself lean. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay," he said. They stayed there longer than either expected. Across town, under the white canopy of the Monte Verde, Feels. Ryan waited for his car in 18-degree cold with his jacket unbuttoned, and his breath coming out in hard clouds he barely noticed. Vanessa stood beside him with her fur on, and her arms crossed so tight it looked painful. Every time she tried to speak, Feels, he told her to be quiet. Feels. That was another lesson the night had delivered to her, though she would only name it later in therapy perhaps, or in the kitchen of a different apartment years from now. Some men are never crueler than when their shame has no one higher ranking to receive it. Feels. "You told me she was nothing," Vanessa said finally. "You told me she was basically gone. Not now and when." He turned on her then, face stripped of charm in the canopy light. Older, meaner, smaller around the eyes. "I am thinking," he snapped. Feels. "Then think alone," she shot back, surprising herself. He stared, and in that stare was the beginning of her own recovery, though she did not know it yet. Not because she won, because she saw him clearly. The car arrived. Feels. He got in without opening the door for her. She got in anyway, but the spell had broken. By the time he told her to go home once they reached Central Park West, she called him what he was and meant it. Feels. Upstairs in the penthouse, Ryan found the apartment clean in ways it had not been for months. The housekeeper he'd fired had clearly been replaced for one final pass. On the dining table sat a cream envelope. He opened it slowly, though he already knew. Eels, the decree, the attorney letter, Isabella's note, written in a hand he suddenly recognized as the handwriting in 7 years of birthday cards, grocery lists, and little domestic notes he had barely looked at. Ryan, the apartment is in my name. Eels. It always was. You have until the end of February to remove your belongings. I have taken nothing from you that was not mine. The photographs are in the guest bathroom drawer where I left them in August. Don't call. He read that last line twice. Eels. Don't call. Clean, unadorned. Stronger because it lacked insult. In the guest bathroom, he found the photographs, 43 of them. His face with Vanessa. His face with others. Hotel vestibules, sidewalks, cabs, restaurants. Eels. He laid them out and stared. Hours later, in the bedroom, he found her wedding ring centered on the pillow. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding it between thumb and forefinger, trying to remember her face at the altar and failing. Eels. That failure hurt him more than the legal documents, because it suggested a truth no one had ever said to him plainly. He had moved through his own life collecting surfaces and missing people. Around 12:40 in the apartment on 63rd, Eels, Isabella fell asleep on the couch with her head against Luca's shoulder. The housekeeper draped cashmere over her and left. Her phone buzzed. Papa. Luca hesitated, then answered because old men like Don Marco do not call twice without reason. Eels. She's asleep, Luca said. On the other end, Marco's voice was rough velvet. Good. How is she? Tired, but clear. Stay there, Marco said, one step to the left. Luca looked down at Isabella's sleeping face. I will. Eels. When he ended the call, he adjusted the blanket over her shoulder and sat without moving for fear of waking her. There was something healing in that stillness, too. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a man choosing not to disturb a woman who had spent too long being emotionally jostled by someone else's appetites. Healing often looks dull from the outside. A blanket, soup, a quiet room. A person who does not demand performance. That night, that was enough. Eels. By 6:11 Sunday morning, Ryan had not slept. The wedding ring was still on the nightstand. His right hand ached from how long he had held it. When his phone buzzed for the third time, he answered because men like Bill Ostrowski, Eels, chief counsel to Caldwell Holdings, do not call 3 times before dawn without catastrophe attached. Are you somewhere private? Bill asked. Ryan almost laughed at the absurdity. I'm in my bedroom, Bill. Good, Eels. In 45 minutes, the Journal is posting a story. Ryan closed his eyes. What story? The true one. Bill did not waste words. Eels. He laid it out in the clipped cadence of a machine in his life, mop up other people's ego spills before they reach litigation. The Gala, the mistress, the ex-wife. The decree finalized in November. Marco Varley, Eels. Luca DeSantis in New York since September. The board chair already asking whether Ryan should appear on Monday's earnings call. The press representative awake since 4. Eels. Greg Moulton refusing comment. Bill's recommendation absolute. Do not go to the office, do not speak to the board, do not speak to the press. Do not under any circumstances call Isabella. Your divorce is not the worst problem you have today, Bill said. Eels. Your divorce is over. What matters is that whatever the Varlas wanted from you, they have already taken it without firing a shot. That is what should frighten you. It did, more than Ryan wanted to admit. Because it reframed everything, Eels. He had spent the night imagining scandal, reputation, maybe a temporary dip. He had not yet grasped the larger humiliation, that while he was busy performing power, other people had rearranged the actual structure beneath him. Legal, financial, social, Eels, domestic, every arena where he assumed he still led. He turned off his phone at 8:10 after seeing the headline on the lock screen. Caldwell Holdings CEO, ex-wife, and a Varley. A New York story. He did not read it. The apartment was too quiet. Eels. Clean, lemon-scented, ghosted by Isabella's organization. He made coffee and stared at the cream envelope again. There is a particular kind of fear that arrives not when you are being attacked, Eels, but when you begin to suspect the attack has been underway for months and you simply were not paying attention. That was where Ryan sat all Sunday morning. He did not feel guilty in any neat moral sense. He was not built that way, Eels. Guilt would have required a developed imagination about other people's suffering. What he felt was more primitive, displacement, loss of narrative control, and under that, though he would resist the label for weeks, grief, real grief, Eels. Not because he had lost a possession, because somewhere in the wreckage he was beginning to perceive that a whole human life had existed beside him, and he had barely learned its language. Heels. Around noon, Bill arrived with breakfast sandwiches and Harriet Lowen, a crisis communication specialist whose rates made CFOs wince. Heels. Harriet took one look at Ryan in sweatpants, unshaven, eyes red, and said, "First, you stop calling this a misunderstanding. It is not. Second, if anyone asks, you say there is a private legal matter already resolved and you will not discuss it. Third, Heels. If you say anything remotely defensive about Ms. Varley, I will walk out and leave you to drown." Bill nodded as if he approved of drowning, provided it was strategically managed. Ryan listened badly at first. He kept circling back to the same question. Heels. "How is this a business story?" Harriet stared at him in open disbelief. "Because character is a governance issue when you are the face of a public company," she said. "Because you humiliated yourself in front of major stakeholders." Heels. "Because you showed terrible judgment. Because the market is made of people, and people are not as good at separating private conduct from public leadership as rich men love to pretend." Again, there was the lesson. Human behavior matters. Heels. Not only in marriage. Heels. In institutions. In the way disrespect travels outward, Ryan had treated that truth as sentimental noise. Now lawyers and investors were reciting it back to him in market terms. He almost preferred when Isabella had said it. Heels. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat in her apartment on West 72nd, wearing yesterday's mascara and a sweatshirt she did not remember pulling on, scrolling through messages she had once believed she wanted. A Page 6 reporter, a stylist. Heels. Two girls from Ohio she had stopped answering months ago. Tisha from the auction house asking if she was okay in the way women ask, when they suspect the answer will be no but want to keep the door open anyway. Heels. Vanessa ignored the media and called her mother instead. It was the first smart thing she had done in months. Her mother answered on the second ring from Dayton, voice sleepy and warm. Heels. Vanessa tried to say, "I'm fine," and burst into tears before the sentence was halfway out. Mothers know things from breathing patterns. Heels. Her mother did not ask whether Ryan loved her. She asked whether she had eaten, whether she was alone, whether someone could stay with her. "I made such a fool of myself," Vanessa whispered. "Baby," her mother said gently. Heels. Being lied to is not the same as being foolish. But staying after the lie is clear. That becomes a choice. So let's make better ones now. That sentence would stay with Vanessa much longer than any glamorous lie Ryan had sold her. Heels. By late afternoon, one of her friends from the auction house, a woman named Pilar who was older and had the kind of practical sympathy that keeps people alive, arrived with groceries, coffee, and a legal pad. Together, they made a list. Change passwords. Heels. Call landlord, review lease. Cancel the key Ryan had saved texts. Do not answer the tabloids yet, sleep. The list steadied Vanessa because lists return scale to a life that is swollen with panic. Isabella, by contrast, Heels, spent Sunday asleep longer than she intended. Heels. When she woke near 1, Luca had left coffee on a tray outside the bedroom and a note in handwriting as controlled as the rest of him. "I am in the study. No one is coming here without my permission. Eat first." That line made her smile despite herself. Heels. Outside the room, the apartment was quiet except for the low clack of keys from the study. She found him at a desk beneath a green lamp, jacket off, sleeves rolled. Heels. Laptop open to what looked less like criminal plotting and more like an executive war room. Names, board members, shareholder relations, outside counsel, nothing illegal, nothing theatrical, just influence correctly timed. Heels. "Are you building an empire or a calendar?" she asked from the doorway. He glanced up, and the severe concentration in his face softened by 1 degree. "Mostly a calendar. That's disappointingly legal." "Legal is underrated," he said. "It lasts longer." Heels. She leaned against the doorframe, mug warming her hands. "My father has corrupted you." Heels. "Your father respects paperwork more than many governments." Another small smile. It felt strange, this domesticity in the shadow of so much a hovel. Strange and precious. "I don't want him destroyed," Isabella said after a minute. Heels. Luca closed the laptop halfway. "I know. I want him stopped. There's a difference. I know that too. Sometimes I feel stupid for even clarifying it." "No," he said. "That clarification is the whole point." Heels. "People who hurt us often make us believe the only choices are surrender or annihilation. There is a third choice."
Boundaries.
She looked at him carefully. "You make terrible things sound reasonable." Heels. "Terrible things are usually more survivable when described correctly. In another home, another life, that exchange might have been flirtation. Here it was medicine." Heels. Later that day, her mother arrived from Westchester with containers of soup and enough concern to fill the elevator. Heels. Elena Varley was a beautiful woman whose softness was never weak, and whose marriage to Don Marco had taught her how to place care inside systems of power without letting power contaminate it. She kissed Isabella's face with both hands, Heels, then inspected her like only a mother can. You ate? Some. Some is not a meal. Elena unpacked soup while giving Luca an approving glance so subtle it would have escaped a less observant man. Over lunch, she did not ask for a blow-by-blow. Heels. She asked what Isabella needed this week. Space, a driver, fewer calls, maybe one afternoon with no discussions of strategy. Then take one, Elena said. The world will continue ruining itself without your supervision for 4 hours. Heels. Isabella laughed, and the sound surprised her. Real laughter after months of administrative grief felt like discovering a window she had forgotten existed. That afternoon, Don Marco called but did not come. This was intentional. Heels. Fathers in his position understand stagecraft as well as any director. A visit would have been support, yes, but it also would have intensified the atmosphere. Instead, he asked 2 questions. Did you sleep? And are you clear? Not happy. Heels. Not vindicated, yes. He exhaled slowly. Good. Clarity is more useful than victory. There was the human lesson again, refracted through the older, harsher ethics of his world. Victory is noisy. Clarity is sustainable. Heels. On Monday, the market opened down 4.4% and slid toward 9 by afternoon. Business television pretended to discuss governance and optics. Online gossip accounts had more fun. Heels. Photos of Isabella in platinum circulated beside shaky captions about quiet wives and old family names. Ryan was not permitted on the earnings call. The board used phrases like temporary leave and leadership continuity, Heels, which in corporate language often mean we are measuring the distance between you and the door. Heels. He listened from his apartment while another executive answered questions that should have been his. Every word felt like being erased in real time. That afternoon, he called Bill and asked for Isabella's new number, Heels. Bill said no so quickly Ryan almost admired it. You do not get to make yourself feel better by forcing contact, Bill said. That is not an option available to you. I just want to explain. Explain what? That you were inattentive for 7 years? Heels. Write it in a journal like the rest of the newly humbled. Ryan hung up. He stood in the kitchen looking at the spot where Isabella used to set mail into 3 neat piles. Personal, household, Heels. Legal, and understood that he had lived inside the labor of her care without ever valuing the intelligence behind it. Even now, the recognition was partial. Growth is not cinematic. It arrives embarrassingly, in fragments, Heels, often after consequences have already landed. Heels. In her own apartment, Vanessa met with a lawyer Pilar's cousin recommended. Not because she intended to sue, because she wanted to understand her lease, her financial exposure, and whether anything Ryan had given her came with strings she did not see. Heels. The lawyer, a patient woman in her 50s, explained in calm terms what was hers and what was leverage. He may offer support again when the panic settles, she said. Do not confuse renewed generosity with changed character. Vanessa nodded. Heels. Embarrassed that she needed the sentence, grateful that someone said it without contempt. Later, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, wiping off old makeup, and looked at herself long enough to feel something she had been avoiding. Not hatred. Heels. Sadness for the version of her that thought being chosen by a powerful man made her valuable. That, too, was a healing moment, though not an easy one. Education sometimes looks like humiliation first, and wisdom only much later. Heels. Isabella spent that Monday not watching the market. She went with Luca to a quiet lunch on the east side where no one approached them. Then walked 3 blocks in the cold with her coat collar turned up. New York after snowfall looked forgiven. Heels. At a corner, she stopped to watch a woman in scrubs help an older man with grocery bags across slush. Such a small scene. Yet it moved her unexpectedly. Respect, attention, Heels. The things Ryan had failed at were happening on ordinary sidewalks every hour without fanfare. She thought about that the rest of the day. How easy it is for wealth to convince people that value lives in scale. In galas, companies, names, Heels. When in truth, the most human parts of life are built through small acts of seeing. By Wednesday, the board scheduled a special meeting Ryan was not invited to attend in person. Bill told him to prepare for a public transition. Heels. On Thursday morning, a courier arrived with a clean document package regarding his office access, temporary communications protocols, and the formal timeline for vacating the penthouse. He signed where indicated. This time he read every page. Feels. The week after the gala stretched and folded in strange ways as crisis weeks always do. Every day felt too full and vaguely unreal. Ryan began measuring time not by clocks but by humiliations. Monday, excluded from the earnings call. Tuesday, feels. A long-time institutional investor asked for reassurance regarding executive stability. Wednesday, the board's chair used the phrase protecting brand integrity in a private meeting, and Ryan heard, with sudden clarity, feels, that he had become the contamination. Thursday, his mother called to say she was praying for him, and then asked, in a tone sharper than prayer, "Who exactly were you married to that you never thought to learn?" Feels. That stung because mothers have a way of locating shame without raising their voices. Ryan had always charmed his mother into treating his selfishness as immaturity with expensive tailoring. Now even she sounded tired. Feels. At first he reacted the way he always had when cornered. He sought angles. Feels. Could he force a reconciliation narrative? Could he leak something suggesting the marriage had been long over? Could he imply that Isabella's family associations complicated the story enough to blur his own conduct? Feels. Harriet shut all of that down with a look usually reserved for interns who confuse PowerPoint with strategy. No smears, she said. No anonymous sourcing. No reframing your wife as mysterious. Your lack of knowledge is not her offense. Feels. The line lodged somewhere unpleasant inside him. Your lack of knowledge is not her offense. He hated it because it named a pattern far bigger than this week. Ryan had moved through the world assuming ignorance could be outsourced. Feels. If he did not know something, someone had failed to brief him. If he misunderstood a person, that person had failed to present clearly. If he neglected a relationship, the neglected party had failed to adapt. Feels. That mindset had built a successful executive. It had also hollowed him out. Feels. Meanwhile, the board moved carefully. Public companies dislike moral language, but they adore risk language, and Ryan had become risk with a tuxedo and a filing problem. Caldwell Holdings had spent years branding itself around trust, feels, domestic aspiration, and premium reliability, not exactly compatible with a CEO who publicly humiliated himself, mishandled legal service, and revealed catastrophic judgment in front of people whose pension funds sat inside his company. Feels. A vote was scheduled for Friday. Bill told Ryan there would be a separation package if he resigned gracefully and a worse outcome if he didn't. Do not make them humiliate you twice in 1 week, Bill advised. Feels. Across town, Isabella stood in the kitchen of the 63rd Street apartment wearing gray cashmere and bare feet, slicing blood oranges while Elena Varley recited a cousin's absurd engagement drama from Naples with enough theatrical disgust to make Luca, Feels, seated at the far end of the table with an espresso, hide a smile behind his cup. It was the first nearly normal morning Isabella had experienced in months. That fact made her both grateful and uneasy. Crisis can become a kind of structure. Feels. When it lifts, you are left facing emptier questions. What now? Who am I without the fight? What part of myself is mine, and what part was merely a response to being hurt? Elena wisened the way only women who survived powerful men can become. Feels. Noticed the drift in her daughter's gaze. You are thinking too hard, she said. It is 9 in the morning. Think softer, Isabella laughed. How does one think softer? By doing one useless thing before noon. Buy flowers you do not need. Feels. Rearrange a shelf. Feels. Call someone you actually like. That sounds suspiciously healthy. Do not mock me because I survived your father by developing hobbies. There it was again, the healing current running quietly beneath the drama. Feels. A story like this could easily harden into pure revenge fantasy, but Isabella did not want that. Neither in his own stern way did Luca. The point was not that a cruel man had been punished. Feels. The point was that people around cruelty were reclaiming their humanity in small, durable ways. Pilar brought Vanessa soup on Thursday too. Different apartment, same principle. Feels. Vanessa had spent 3 days alternating between numb scrolling and practical panic. Feels. She sent one short text to Ryan on Monday. Do not contact me again unless it concerns the lease, and blocked him after he replied with a paragraph that somehow managed to sound wounded and superior at the same time. Feels. Her lawyer helped her negotiate with the landlord. She called her mother every night. Feels. She went back to the auction house Wednesday afternoon because rent, unlike shame, does not pause for emotional recovery. Tisha hugged her at the coat rack and then wisely did not overperform concern. Work, even ordinary work, helped. Feels. It returned sequence, labels, tasks, names of artists, delivery schedules. Vanessa noticed, with some embarrassment, that she liked being useful more than being admired. That realization hurt and healed at once. Heals. By Thursday, she had stopped checking gossip accounts. By Friday, she answered page 6 only to say no comment, and felt unexpectedly proud of herself afterward. Heals. In another part of the city, Ryan sat in his attorney's conference room, signing a resignation letter. Not because he wanted to, because the board vote, once he heard the count, was no longer a fight. Graceful departure in the statement. Heals. Personal matters. Time to reflect. Confidence in the company's future. Heals. All the sanitized language modern institutions use to convert moral failure into market-safe phrasing. When the last page was signed, Bill slid a glass of water toward him and did not pretend any of this was temporary. "You are wealthy enough to be fine." Heals. Bill said. "That is not the same thing as being all right." Ryan looked at him. "Do you think I deserve this?" Bill, who had known him for 11 years and had gradually grown from impressed to tired, leaned back in his chair. Heals. "I think consequences are not a jury," he said. "They are an answer." Ryan took the water and did not drink it. Later that evening, he returned to the penthouse earlier than usual and wandered through rooms that now felt staged for someone else's life. Heals. He opened drawers, found things he had not noticed before. A small notebook Isabella used for recipes and household notes, margin scribbles from books. Heals. A list of soup ingredients from a winter when he had the flu, and she stayed up cooling broth because the fever made him impatient. A museum ticket stub from a date he had forgotten but she had kept. These were not grand discoveries. Heals. That was precisely why they undid him. He was seeing the archive of an ordinary love he had treated as background maintenance. No wonder the grief now felt disproportionate to the event. He had not just lost status. Heals. He had lost access to a world of care he never bothered to name. Whether that recognition would make him better remained unclear. Pain alone does not improve people. Sometimes it just makes them more self-pitying. Heals. But the possibility of change had at least entered the room. On Saturday, 1 week after the gala, Isabella agreed to lunch with Vanessa. The idea had not come from pity. It came from unfinished conscience. Heals. A short message had arrived through lawyers. Heals. Cole wishes only to apologize in person for her role, and to say there will be no further contact. Isabella stared at it for a while. Luca read it over her shoulder and said, "You can refuse. I know. If you go, go for yourself. Not for her." Heals. "I know that too." They met in a discreet tea room inside a hotel no tabloid bothered to watch. Vanessa arrived early, wearing black wool, almost no makeup. Heals. And the kind of expression people get after a week of learning things about themselves too quickly. She stood when Isabella approached. "Thank you for coming." "Sit," Isabella said. There was no point prolonging the awkwardness. Vanessa's apology, Heals, when it came, was imperfect, and therefore more believable than polished remorse would have been. She admitted she had known Ryan was married. Admitted she had believed the marriage was basically over, because that was easier than asking harder questions. Heals. Admitted she had wanted the life she thought proximity to him promised. Heals. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just didn't want to disappear from this story as if I learned nothing." Isabella watched her over the rim of her teacup. That line mattered. Not disappear as if I learned nothing. Heals. Accountability without self-annihilation. Again, human complexity. "I am not interested in making you suffer longer than the lesson requires," Isabella said at last. Vanessa blinked fast and looked down. "But learn it thoroughly." "I will." Heals. "Learn that when a man has room in his mouth for contempt toward his wife, one day he will find room for it toward you." Vanessa nodded. "I already did." Isabella softened by a fraction. "And learn that being chosen is not the same as being valued." Heals. A silence followed, not comfortable. "Useful." Vanessa looked up. "Why were you kind to me that night?" Isabella considered the question. Heals. "Because I know what it costs a woman to understand too late that she accepted a role in someone else's story instead of building her own." Heals. That was the closest she came to tenderness. Vanessa held it carefully. They parted without hugging. Still, both women left lighter than they arrived. Not friends, not allies in some sentimental sense. Heals. Simply two people refusing to let one man's selfishness be the only meaning extracted from what happened. That evening, Isabella told Luke about the lunch while they walked back from dinner under a hard, clear sky. "Was it useful?" he asked. "Yes." Heals, she said after a moment. "Strangely. Then it was worth doing." They crossed at Lexington. A delivery cyclist swore at a cab. Somewhere above them, a couple argued with the window cracked open. The city had resumed being itself, Eels. Not a stage for betrayal, just New York, exhausted, expensive, full of ordinary mercies if you knew where to look, Eels. At the apartment, Luca set down his keys, loosened his collar, and asked, "Would you like me to come with you when you collect the last things from the Arlen tomorrow?" "No," Isabella said, then reconsidered. "Actually, yes. But not because I'm afraid, Eels. Because," she looked at him, "because I am tired of doing hard things alone even when I can." He held her gaze for a second, and in that second there was more intimacy than their legal marriage certificate had yet managed to produce. "Good, Eels," he said quietly. "That is a wiser reason." They stood close in the entryway, neither moving first. Then he touched the side of her face with the back of 2 fingers, a gesture so careful it nearly broke her. Eels. She leaned into it before she could think better. No grand music, no thunder. Just a woman learning that gentleness offered without control attached can feel almost unbearable when you have been starved of it. Eels. "I am going to kiss you now," he said, because consent to him was not a modern slogan but old discipline. "Yes," she whispered, and when he did, it was not conquest, it was recognition, slow enough to stop, certain enough not to need proving. Later, lying awake, Isabella realized she felt something she had not felt in years. Not triumph, safety. The distinction mattered. Eels. By the end of February, Ryan had vacated the penthouse. Professional movers boxed his suits, watches, golf clubs, framed photos, and the curated artifacts of a man who had always believed taste could be purchased wholesale. Eels. The apartment looked larger without him. Cleaner, yes, but also truer somehow, as if the rooms exhaled once his restless vanity stopped ricocheting off the glass. Isabella did not go there while the work was being done. She sent attorneys, Eels, inventory managers, and a house consultant her mother trusted. When the final report arrived, she read it at the kitchen table on 63rd while Luca reviewed a contract beside her. Everything removed. Eels. Photographs from the guest bath archived at her instruction. Remaining correspondence forwarded. No issues. She signed the acknowledgement and sat for a while with the paper in front of her. Endings, she was learning, Eels, rarely feel like a single clean door shutting. They feel administrative, repetitive. Eels. Full of signatures and quiet afternoons where nothing dramatic happens at all. Yet there was a deep mercy in that ordinariness. Her life no longer needed to be organized around anticipating someone else's selfishness. Eels. That freedom entered in humble ways. She slept. She ate breakfast before coffee. She resumed work at the gallery she backed. She answered her mother's calls because she wanted to, not because avoiding them would lead to family intervention. Eels. She began slowly to inhabit her own time again. Luca never rushed the emotional architecture between them. He remained what he had been from the beginning, present, exact, available, untheatrical. Their marriage, born from crisis and law, Eels, started becoming something else through repetition. Sunday dinners with Elena and Marco, where politics, art, and the quality of olive oil were debated with equal seriousness. Eels. Quiet mornings where Isabella read on the sofa, while Luca worked through a stack of documents at the desk. Eels. One ridiculous evening assembling a bookshelf because he refused to hire someone for a task he considered insultingly straightforward, only to discover he had misread the instructions and installed 2 shelves upside down. Eels. Isabella laughed until she cried. He took the laughter with composure and fixed the shelves. Healing often announces itself that way, not through speeches but through the body, remembering how to laugh without flinching afterward. Vanessa moved too. Eels. Not far. A smaller apartment in Brooklyn paid for with a salary she had once dismissed as temporary. She kept her job at the auction house, added weekend work assisting at events, Eels, and began seeing a therapist whose office smelled like cedar and tea. In those sessions, she unpacked the difference between ambition and self-erasure, between wanting more from life and accepting crumbs because they arrived on expensive plates. Eels. Months later, she would tell Pilar that the worst part of the entire scandal had not been the gossip. It had been realizing how little of her own life she had been authoring. The relief, once it came, was that authorship can begin late and still count. Eels. She never became friends with Isabella. That was never the point. But one spring morning, a note arrived at the gallery with a single line and no signature. I learned it thoroughly. Isabella smiled when she read it and tucked the card into a drawer. Eels. Ryan's trajectory was less graceful. The separation package bought him comfort, not peace. For several months he floated through Miami Aspen, then London. Eels. seeing people who knew him only from older headlines and could therefore still be charmed by the version of him he preferred. Yet charm, once stripped of consequences at home, began tasting stale even to him. He dated briefly, too soon, too shallow, feels too obvious. The women sensed something off, not danger exactly, vacancy, feels. Bill, in one unexpectedly candid phone call, told him, "You can spend the next 10 years trying to rebuild the image, or you can spend 1 year becoming a man who no longer needs it so badly." Ryan mocked the idea at first. Then, to his own irritation, feels. He started therapy with a man recommended by a board member's wife. The first few sessions were useless. He narrated, justified, performed insight. The therapist waited him out. Eventually, because repetition wears grooves even in proud people, feels. Ryan said one true thing. "I do not know why I needed admiration from women I didn't even like." The question did not fix him, but it was the first honest one he had asked in years. Whether he answered it well is another story, feels. Redemption is not guaranteed simply because pain finally becomes reflective. Some people grow. Some merely become more articulate about their damage. Still, life became quieter for him, and that quiet at least removed victims from immediate range. Feels. The spring thaw came to the city with dirty snowbanks, crocuses near the park, and a loosening in everyone's shoulders. One Saturday in April, Isabella and Luca drove to Westchester for lunch. Feels. Don Marco insisted on grilling himself, despite Elena's warnings, burned the first round of vegetables, blamed the wind, feels, and then spent 20 minutes explaining municipal corruption in 3 states to a nephew who had only asked about real estate taxes. The house was full. Cousins, aunts, children running through rooms carrying sticky orange slices, feels. Matteo in the corner pretending not to be entertained by any of it. Isabella stood for a while at the kitchen counter cutting bread with her mother and felt, with some surprise, no urge to escape, feels. For years she had treated family gatherings as obligations wrapped in affection. Now, after the emotional starvation of her marriage, the density of care here felt different. Imperfect, overbearing sometimes, but real, feels. Don Marco found her on the terrace later, where she stood looking out over the late afternoon lawn. "You are lighter," he said. She smiled faintly. "That sounds suspiciously like a weight critique," feels. It is a father's privilege to criticize previous sadness after it has left. He stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "Do not become sentimental about suffering simply because you survived it." She turned. "I wasn't planning to." "Good," feels. "Suffering is a bad teacher if one begins to worship it." She laughed softly. Trust her father to deliver humanist wisdom as if he were negotiating a shipping route. "I did learn something, though," she said. "Which is?" She thought about Ryan, about Vanessa, feels. About herself, about all the small moments that had followed the big dramatic one. "That respect is not a mood," she said slowly. "It is a habit, and when it is missing, love becomes theater very quickly." Marco looked at her with quiet approval. "That, feels," he said, "is worth all the lawyers." Feels. Inside, Luca was helping Elena carry dishes because, unlike Ryan, he never treated women's labor as atmospheric. Isabella watched him through the French doors, sleeves rolled, feels. Listening carefully to her mother's instructions about where certain serving bowls lived, though he had been told before. Attention. Again and again it came back to that. Not grand sacrifice, not dangerous romance. Attention, feels. The honoring of another person's reality. In May, Isabella accepted an invitation to speak privately at a foundation lunch about women, financial autonomy, and the hidden vulnerabilities inside marriages that look privileged from the outside, feels. She refused the panel title at first because it sounded patronizing, then agreed when she was allowed to shape the conversation herself. No gossip, no names, just practical truths. Read what you sign. Know what is in your name and what is not, feels. Emotional neglect is not glamorous simply because it happens in expensive rooms, feels. If a person only values you when you stabilize their image, you are not in a partnership, you are in service. The audience, mostly women with money but not always clarity, listened harder than polite philanthropy usually requires, feels. Afterward, 3 women approached her separately to say some version of the same thing. "I thought because there was no violence, maybe there was no real harm." Isabella went home heavy with that knowledge. Harm wears many suits, feels. That evening she told Luca she feared becoming someone who turned all pain into public utility. He handed her a glass of wine and said, "Then keep most of your life private. Offer only what is useful. Keep the rest for love. Simple." Right, feels. The story the tabloids had wanted from the beginning was never the one that mattered most. They wanted mistress, mafia, public humiliation, billionaire downfall. Those things happened. They were dramatic. They sold. Heels. But underneath them was a more durable story. Heels. A woman discovering she had mistaken tolerance for love. Another woman discovering she had mistaken selection for worth. A man forced, maybe too late, to confront the emptiness behind his appetite. Heels. A father using power not to cage his daughter but to help her leave. A second man proving that intensity and gentleness are not mutually exclusive. In early summer, Isabella and Luca returned to Calabria for 3 quiet days. Heels. The cathedral where they had married was small and cool, and smelled of stone and wax. They stood inside one afternoon alone except for a woman arranging flowers near the altar. Heels. Isabella looked up at the painted ceiling and thought of the version of herself who had stood there months before, signing papers she understood legally, but not yet emotionally. Luca touched her hand. "Regrets?" he asked. She looked at him. "No, Heels," she said. Then, because truth had become easier now, fear, yes, but no regrets. Fear of what? Of happiness being temporary. Heels. He nodded as if this were the most reasonable fear in the world. "Everything is temporary," he said. "That is why respect matters so much. It is what makes temporary things worth having." She smiled. "That is almost romantic. Do not tell anyone." Heels. Outside, bells sounded the hour. They walked down the stone steps into late sunlight. No photographers, no investors, no audience demanding meaning. Heels. Just 2 people carrying the complicated remains of their old lives towards something that had not been promised easy, only honest. Months later, when people still occasionally mentioned the gala, the details had already begun to distort in retelling. Heels. The number of guests grew. The pause at the door lengthened. The dialogue sharpened into cleaner lines than life usually provides. That always happens. Stories simplify themselves in public. But the truest parts of this one were the least flashy. Heels. The tremor in Isabella's hand once the doors closed. Heels. Vanessa making a list with groceries on the counter. Ryan learning to read every page before signing. Elena insisting on soup. Luca asking before he kissed her. Don Marco saying clarity is more useful than victory. Those were the real architecture. Heels. The rest was chandeliers. And if the story holds any lasting value beyond its spectacle, perhaps it is this. No amount of money, status, or practiced charm exempts a person from the human obligation to see other people clearly. Heels. The ones who love you are not scenery. The ones who trust you are not assets. The quiet person in the room may be carrying more power than you know. Yes, but far more importantly, heels. They are carrying a full and sacred life that does not become smaller because you failed to honor it. When that truth is ignored long enough, consequences eventually arrive. Sometimes as headlines, sometimes as court papers, heels. Sometimes as an empty apartment that smells faintly of lemon and the absence of the person who kept it warm, heels. And sometimes, if grace allows, consequences arrive early enough to teach instead of only destroy. That is the ending worth keeping, not the fall of a man, the return of several people to themselves.